You're listening to Melissa and Lori Love Literacy. Today we'll be answering questions from our book, The Literacy 50. We'll share research-based answers to your most pressing questions about teaching reading, and we'll give practical suggestions for what you can do in your classroom tomorrow.
So which questions will we answer today? 2 questions about reading comprehension. What about sustained silent reading? I know there's a lot of pushback, but is there a place for it in the school day? What are the best ways to assess a student's comprehension? Do you have suggestions?
Hi, teacher friends. I'm Lori.
And I'm Melissa.
We are 2 educators who want the best for all kids, and we know you do too.
We worked together in Baltimore when the district adopted a new literacy curriculum.
We realized there was so much more to learn about how to teach reading and writing.
Lori and I can't wait to keep learning with you today.
Hi, everyone. Today is a very special episode. We'll be answering questions about comprehension from our new book.
And before we jump in, you might want to know how the book is structured. We answer 50 questions, hence the Literacy 50, about teaching reading. In 5 chapters, we have 10 questions each. And each chapter aligns with a pillar of reading: phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension.
Yep, we answer each question with a research-based response, then tell you what you can do aligned with research. We even provide printable resources and strategies for you to use in your classroom tomorrow. It's my favorite part. And of course, we share podcast episodes you can listen to that connect with each question and each topic so you can continue to learn more. So today we're going to give you a sneak peek of some questions from chapter 5, which is all about comprehension. So let's jump in.
All right, so the first question we're tackling is about sustained silent reading. So what about it? I know there's a lot of pushback, and is there a place for it in the school day? You ready for this one, Lori?
I'm ready. I'm buckling up. Let's go.
So to answer kind of briefly, we'll say, the best way to maximize the instructional time in any school day is with instruction. So we'll start with that because I think we all have... I'm speaking for myself. Me and you both have experienced this sustained silent reading time where everyone has a book out. Everyone is supposedly reading, but and I know that some of the kids were, and some of the kids were loving that time, usually are better readers. And then we had a ton of kids who were doing whatever they could to get out of that time, pretend that they were reading, had the book in front of them, flipping the pages, but it really wasn't a good use of time for those students. So it's one of those things where, some of the kids would love it, but it's not always the best use of time for everybody. So just to share some research, the National Reading Panel, way back when, they did not find research in favor of using instructional time for silent independent reading. Sometimes we call it SSR or DEAR time. But what we do know, there is research that shows good readers read more than poor readers, which also makes sense. But we also know that that's likely because good readers like to read more. So as with everything, when we can do something well, we are motivated to do it more. I know that this is me with running, Lori. I'm just not good at running and I don't enjoy doing it. But biking, I'm on it. I love it. I'll do it all the time because I'm pretty good at it. So Lori's much better at running, so she does it more.
I know. We're the exact opposite in that scenario. And so I'm helping you get ready for your triathlon by cheering you on in your running.
Yeah. So the key here is, if you have students who still need instruction on how to be a better reader, use that time more effectively by actually teaching them. And I think the real key here is, I'm trying to see who's told us this, but I'm not sure. But it doesn't matter. But for students who are reading fluently, then you can start to think about this independent reading time. But if students are still not even reading fluently, they need more instruction and more practice in phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency. They need that time. So using that time for just independent reading is not necessarily the best use of time there. But once students are reading fluently, then there is research to support a volume of reading, because that is when you get these books that have really great vocabulary. This is where students learn more about the world around them. So they're building knowledge, they're building their vocabulary. So it is important to think about how much students are reading. But until they're reading fluently, it's really not the best use of time. And Lori, I think you're going to talk about some ways to do that reading once they're reading fluently in a really strategic way.
Yeah. And I just wanted to pause really quickly because if you're listening, you might be thinking, okay, Melissa, there's this volume of reading that you're talking about. And they might be thinking you might be thinking about volume in two ways. One might be like the actual amount of time the reader is reading and like in terms of a volume of reading. And then we might be thinking of a volume of reading in terms of like the volume of what we're reading. Like, like I know when I get obsessive about a topic, I'm like Googling it and consuming whatever I can. And then that might take me into Instagram. And then that might take me into an article that I find. And then, suddenly I'm reading a book about that. And there's like an actual volume of like physical books of reading. So do we want to talk about that very briefly?
Sure.
So I know like what I'm going to talk about and what I'm going to share is how to help students and how to curate a volume of actual books for reading. But I think what you're saying is that the more that students read, then the better readers they become, which in order to do that, they need to be fluent readers to begin with. Am I right on that?
Yes, but they become better readers because of the connectedness, right? So it really does kind of all fit
together. It's like
together.
a cycle. Yes. Yeah. I'm circling my hand around. Yeah. Okay, cool. So how can we support students with reading volume, which is like actually providing them with the stuff they need in order to read more? So there's kind of two ways to approach this. We can approach it through text sets and full-length texts. We'll talk about text sets first. So text sets are a series of texts on a topic, and they're different than traditional independent reading. And because of course, I read that the first time I was like, well, what's the difference between that and just like reading? They're different because students have the vocabulary and background knowledge to tackle these texts because they're about topics that students are familiar with. So I'll give you an example. In 7th grade, students might be reading the book Code Talker. Well, then in a text set, we might be looking at an article that someone wrote about that same time period. We might be watching a video about the attack on Pearl Harbor. We might be watching a little snippet about Navajo code talkers. We might be reading something else that is related. So we're reading a whole nother text. Like we could be reading Farewell to Manzanar, which is a whole nother text. But that brings me into the next one, which is full length text. So I said there were two ways we could approach this. We could approach it through text sets or full length texts. And text sets are like shorter texts that provide that vocabulary and knowledge on topics students are learning about. Full length texts are full-length texts that are related to what students are learning about as well, those same topics. So if we wanted to give that same example of students reading Code Talkers in ELA, then we could pair that with a text that students might read, which is Farewell to Manzanar. They're reading, it's about the same time period, but different group of people. And so that's something that could be really helpful. So as you're planning to use text sets to increase students' volume of reading, you can use these questions to help you think about how students can build knowledge on topics. Which topics are students already learning about or studying? What texts will continue to build students' knowledge on these topics? How might students read, discuss, and write about the topics that they're studying? And how can related arts subject areas support students in learning about these topics?
Are we ready for our next question?
We sure are.
All right. So our next question is about assessment. And what are the best ways to assess a student's comprehension? Do we have suggestions?
Oh, we do. We love talking about this.
Yeah. Well, you'll probably have more of the suggestions, but I'll talk a little bit about just assessing comprehension and why it's a little bit difficult. It's a little tough.
Little tricky.
It's very tricky, actually. So, the reason that it's so tricky is because we can't think of it as we might do with other skills, right? So other skills, like can they read CVC words, right? That is very concrete, right? Either most of the time you have students who can do it or they can't, and you can check it off. Great. And we tried to do this with comprehension, but it doesn't work in the same way. So again, you and I made this mistake, Lori, where we would assess for, can they find the main idea of a text? We would check it off, say yes or no. I know we both felt a little uncomfortable with that all through our time teaching, but it is something we did in the past where we would kind of say, yes, they can do this thing. And then we think they can do that with every text they come across, but that is not the case, right? And the reason is Hugh Katz brought this up on our podcast, which is reading comprehension is not just one thing. It's not a skill. It depends on the reader, the text, and the task. And so I think most importantly, I would say in this conversation about assessing, the text is always going to be different, right? So you have your reader, they're bringing what they can. So there are different skills to this text, but each text is different. It's a different knowledge that they need to understand it. It's different vocabulary, right? So the vocabulary could be just words that they do know or words they don't know for whatever reason, right? So it's going to be very different. The syntax, the structure, everything's going to be different about this text. And the task, for assessing could be very different as well. So you really have to think about all of those different things. And with reading comprehension, I don't want to forget, you have to go all the way back and think, what's getting in the way of them comprehending? So I mentioned some things that it might be with the different texts, but you also have to think back to their phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, those word recognition skills, and think, are those getting in the way of students being able to comprehend? Because if they are not reading fluently, I can tell you they probably are getting in the way of them being able to comprehend the text. And so then you can't just go ahead and ask a question about main idea and check it off and say, yes, they can find main ideas, or no, they can't find main ideas, because you don't know what in there helped them find the main idea, or more likely, like, why couldn't they find the main idea of this text? Because you don't know exactly which of all of those different things got in the way of them being able to find that main idea.
Yeah. And I'll throw another wrench in there, something I've been thinking a lot about since Hugh's episode. I know so often we think that if we just thought about the text and the task always change, right? But the reader changes too. As the reader learns more and grows more and acquires more skills, acquires more knowledge. I mean, the reader is always changing as well. And, I just think that that's something that's really important. Like, those are 3 variables, not really 2, right? And so just to kind of stamp that from what you just kind of shared is, I think, important.
Absolutely. Yeah. So are you going to tell us what we can do now? You're giving the suggestions?
I would love to. Yeah. Well, I'll start with a quote, one of my favorite quotes. So chairperson of the Core Knowledge Foundation, E.D. Hirsch Jr. said, reading tests are actually knowledge tests in disguise. And I love this quote. I think it so is the essence of part of the struggle of assessing comprehension, that we can't assess knowledge necessarily that we haven't taught. So I think that that's kind of the critical piece I'm going to share. What you can do is you can test what you teach. And the easiest way to do this is to stay within your curriculum topics. I like to think about it like this. As an adult, if I went to take a college course or an ongoing learning course, and I learned about, I'm making it up, I learned about birds all throughout the course, and then my assessment was on whales, I would be livid. I would be so infuriated. And this isn't fair. I didn't learn this. It wasn't what I was taught. But we do that to kids all the time. I mean, that is the essence of standardized assessment too.
Especially for reading comprehension.
Especially for reading comprehension. That's right. So what we can do is we can test what's been taught. That means necessary skills, knowledge, and understanding of content. Again, the easiest way to do that is to stay within your curricular topics and to stay within your curriculum assessments, especially if you have really high quality curriculum, right? So some kind of do's and don'ts for comprehension. I love these. I think these are really helpful. So some do's and don'ts. Do stay within your curriculum, assess what's taught. Don't use standards-based grading. We're not big fans of that because it does break it into isolated skills, like Melissa said. Do use discussion and writing as measures of comprehension. Don't use comprehension assessments outside of the curriculum as a measure of learning. Do consider what else might be getting in the way. For example, fluency, gaps in those foundational skills, etc. Don't use comprehension assessments as a way to predict future comprehension. And that's a bold one, right? We don't want to say that because we couldn't comprehend something today well, that we can't do it tomorrow. I was just saying, Melissa, before we jumped on, how tired I was today. So I think my comprehension is probably a little lower today than average. But yeah, just kind of keeping all of those outside factors in mind. And I love those do's and don'ts. We have a little printable chart in our book that you can scan and print. So we answer these questions and so many more in our book, right, Melissa?
Absolutely. So the Literacy 50, it's available now. You can find it on scholastic.com, Amazon, other stores.
Wherever you buy books.
Wherever you buy books. So go ahead and go get it if you enjoyed these questions. And we can't wait to hear what you think. To stay connected with us, sign up for our email list at literacypodcast.com. Join our Facebook group and follow us on Instagram and Twitter.
If this episode resonated with you, take a moment to share with a teacher friend or leave us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts.
Just a quick reminder that the views and opinions expressed by the hosts and guests of the Melissa and Lori Love Literacy podcast are not necessarily the opinions of Great Minds PBC or its employees.
We appreciate you so much, and we're so glad you're here to learn with us.